first leg of our Mediterranean Odyssey began at 3:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at Bangor International Airport. The 535-mile flight to Philadelphia took just under 2 hours. From there, it was 4,051 miles and 8 hours to El Prat Airport in Barcelona. The city is at GMT +2, which is 6 hours later than the East Coast and 9 hours later than the Pacific. Our planned arrival time was 8:55 a.m. After a pleasant flight, we arrived a little early. It gave us plenty of time to check through customs and immigration and then wait for friends we expected to be right behind us, coming from Panama, Boston, New York, and Canada. Due to technical difficulties, they weren't able to catch up with us, and so in early afternoon, we took the shuttle over to the hotel and caught up with them there. The weather in Barcelona, indeed in all of southern Europe in the Mediterranean, is sunny, warm, and dry, very much like Southern California. As a matter of fact, even the palms seemed familiar here. It's kind of expensive, especially to Americans considering the exchange rate with the euro. But Barcelona is well maintained and modern, and much more so than many American cities. Barcelona proper is home to 1.6 million people, but its administrative area, what we would call the metro area in the U.S., is about 4.7 million. The Mirador Column, the Columbus Monument, was built in 1888 for the World's Fair, honoring Christopher Columbus in his first voyage to the new continent, to discovering the Americas, which was financed by the Spanish government in the person of Queen Isabella 523 years ago. The next section of this street reminds me of Catella Avenue in Anaheim by the Anaheim Convention Center in Disneyland. All the palms lining the edges of the street look so familiar. It was a pretty drive on a perfect day, and we spent most of the rest of the trip to our hotel just gawking. The Arc de Triomphe and the gorgeous park adjoining it was built in 1888. It was the entrance to the Barcelona Universal Exposition. That's the 1888 World's Fair. No, that's not our cruise ship yet. It won't be back from Venice for 2 more days. We took cable cars to climb the hill to Montjuic Castle at the top of it. Fantastic views of the city and the harbor beyond. Then, after a long day, we made it back into town and took the subway back to the hotel. We spent much of the next 2 days meandering the welcoming streets in the warm Mediterranean sun. Barcelona is both strikingly modern and incredibly old. It was established by Hannibal's father 250 years before Christ. Construction began on this basilica in 1342. That was 150 years before Columbus sailed on his first voyage, and was pretty much completed by 1500. Though construction began on this basilica and church in 1882, renowned architect Paul Goldberger called it, quote, the most extraordinary personal interpretation of Gothic architecture since the Middle Ages. The thing is incredible. We spent much of our last full day just strolling, eating, and shopping along La Rambla. It was certainly one of the high points in Barcelona and of our entire vacation. The next morning dawned cloudy, and on our way to embark on our ship, it started drizzling on us. Perfect timing. Our ship, the Norwegian Spirit, steamed through the night to our next port, Toulon, France. Flying through the French waters as the sun was coming up, I had an odd memory. The last time my dad was in France was in 1944. He landed at a little beach called Normandy. Our first stop after driving to Marseille was Longchamp Palace, which actually houses the Museum of Fine Arts and the Natural History Museum. It took 30 years to complete in 1869. That was just a year before the Franco-Prussian War, when Napoleon III and France was decisively defeated by Prussia, the progenitors of Germany. Past is prologue. From there, we drove along the Mediterranean coast on the Corniche J.F. Kennedy, named for the 35th President of the United States. We were on our way to the Notre Dame de la Garde, up in the hills overlooking Marseille. Once we turned away from the Mediterranean and started climbing the hills, we crossed into French wine country. The Notre Dame de la Garde is a Catholic basilica built on the foundations of an ancient fort. An extensive restoration took place on the basilica from 2001 to 2008, including work on mosaics damaged by candle smoke and the impact of bullets during the liberation of France at the end of World War II. Once we got to the top, we were rewarded with a windy but stunning panoramic view of Marseille and the surrounding area. Aix-en-Provence is a city of about 143,000, 30 kilometers, it's 19 miles north of Marseille. The city was founded in 123 BC by the Roman consul Sextius Calvinus. Its position in the south of France gives it a very warm climate. It also has an average of 300 days of sunshine and only 91 days of rain. It's a very relaxing city just made for strolling the Cour Mirabeau and sidewalk dining. We had spent some time touring the city and Sharon and I decided that we were getting hungry. However, we had a short time before we had to head back to our ship. We hastily sat down at an Irish pub, feeling guilty that we weren't eating French food. We chose fish and chips from the menu. The chips were actually French fries. And that's actually French food, isn't it? Finally, it was back to our ship, basking in the sun in an azure sea. What could be better than a dish of ice cream and the sun setting over the French coast? Our overnight transit took us to our third port city of Livorno and our third country, Italy. The sunrise over the Ligurian Sea was another beauty. From the comfort of our starboard terrace, we watched the harbor pilot come aboard while sipping Italian coffee. Though the population of Livorno is under 200,000, still it is the third largest port on the west coast. When we arrived, there were dozens of buses on the dock waiting to take passengers on a myriad of excursions. On the trip to Florence, metro population 1.5 million, and ultimately to Pisa, we saw lots of Italian farmlands and provincial homes, many of them on vineyards. The metropolitan area of Pisa is home to around 200,000 residents, and today lots and lots and lots of tourists from every continent. For most of us, the goal today was to get to Miracle Square, home of the Baptistry, Cathedral, and the Bell Tower, better known as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It was also a special day for Sharon and I. It was our 27th anniversary that day. Upon leaving Miracle Square, sauntering through the streets of Pisa was like walking through a living art museum. The laid-back style we saw in southern Spain and France was much in evidence in Pisa, Italy. We made it back to the ship in early afternoon, and after a little sightseeing from the deck, we spent a couple of hours in the hot tubs and enjoying a few drinks for our anniversary. That night at dinner, we were surprised with an anniversary cake and the waitstaff singing "Let Me Call You Sweetheart" to the two of us. The next morning, we arrived at the port of Civitavecchia, 50 miles northwest of Rome. During World War II, Allied bombings nearly destroyed this port of Civitavecchia, but left Rome nearly untouched. The excursion to Rome and back was a long day for us, nearly 12 hours, but there was lots to see. It began with an hour-and-a-half drive to Rome. We followed the coastline for much of it. Later, as we headed inland, we crossed more farmland and wine country. Rome is the capital of Italy and was the first city with 1 million people back in 100 years before Christ. Rome is one of the worst big cities in the world for traffic. Streets were never modernized enough to handle where they are today. The population now of the city is 2.8 million. The metro area is 4.3 million. The Pantheon was built in the year AD 126 as a temple to all the gods of ancient Rome. It has been in continuous use throughout its history, and since the 7th century the Pantheon has been used as a church dedicated to St. Mary's and the martyrs. We spent much of our time in Rome simply walking through the city. Due to the congestion, it just wasn't feasible to drive a bus anywhere. This is a good example of a gated community in upscale Rome. We had lunch in a small cafe, and the food was great, but who doesn't like Italian food? Later, outside, a cellist and later his wife or significant other joined him in a concert. I couldn't record the sound very well, there was too much background on. So I added this soundtrack of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 in G by Misha Maisky. Later, after lunch, working our way deeper into the heart of Rome, we crossed the Tiber River on the way to the Colosseum. Construction of the Colosseum was completed in 80 AD. To this day, it is still the largest amphitheater ever built and is considered one of the greatest works of architecture and engineering. At its capacity, it could hold up to 80,000 spectators. It was used for gladiatorial contests, public spectacles, mock sea battles, animal hunts, executions, reenactments of famous battles, and dramas from classical mythology. Our next stop was at St. Peter's Square in St. Peter's Basilica, the largest church in the world. Not long after we arrived, the clouds that had been threatening rain the last couple of hours started to pour. We immediately walked across the square and got in line to visit the Vatican. Admission is free here, but everyone has to wait in line to go through security screening before they can be admitted. Jim had a great idea just before we had to get out of line. He said we should go up to security and tell them that, quote, Frankie sent me. It took me a moment, but I realized that Frankie alluded to Pope Francis. I don't think it would have worked, though. Our next port of call was Naples, Italy. As we pulled into the harbor, it was lightly raining, and clouds streamed down from Mount Vesuvius down to the ocean. It was really socked in. But this very fast-paced day turned out to be certainly one of our favorites. One of our first stops was at a cameo shop. These carvers can do some amazing things with the shell of a mussel. From there, we traveled to the legendary lost city, Pompeii. This city was buried under lava and molten rock and ash from the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, nearly 2,000 years ago. This mosaic floor was on the entryway to a rather wealthy person's home. Cave Canem means beware of dog. And this was a baking oven, and right next to it, repositories for alcoholic beverages. This was an outdoor diner. These bars/diners were apparently very popular, especially in the warm summer months. From here, we traveled south to the city of Sorrento. Our stroll through Sorrento was somewhat crowded, but at least the rain had stopped. We had another fun and delicious lunch. When we came out, the sun was shining. The city of Sorrento is built on cliffs overlooking Naples Harbor. And now that the sun was shining, we were rewarded with a fantastic view. We made our way down the quaint and winding streets into the harbor of Sorrento to board a boat for our next destination. We made our way from Sorrento to the Isle of Capri. On this picture-perfect day, Capri was everything you would expect from a Mediterranean island. As we walked down the docks, gazing at our gorgeous surroundings, little did we know that Capri was not just a pretty harbor. There was lots more to this fantastic island. We rode a funicular up to a terrace with an incredible scenic overlook of the small island, the coast, and the sparkling sea. We browsed through the Augustus Gardens, overlooking the sea. The view from up there needs to be seen and not described.
It's 2 minutes to go.
We finally tore ourselves away and headed for the Piazzetta. And what better way to end the tour than with some delicious gelato. Exhausted but fulfilled, we headed back to Naples and our ship. As the Spirit weighed anchor, we watched Naples fall behind, from our terrace, sipping wine and remembering the fantastic day we'd had. 7 years before I was born, this is how Americans and British got to Naples. They were fighting to liberate Italy from the Nazis. Flushed from victories in North Africa and Sicily, a coalition of the U.S. Fifth Army and British Eighth Army, with plenty of help from the Italian resistance, was finally kicking the Nazis out of southern Italy. Naples was the most heavily bombed city in Italy. There was a hell of a mess to clean up when they were through. And if all of that wasn't enough, on March 18, 1944, Mount Vesuvius erupted once again, destroying a number of Italian villages. At least by then, the Nazis were gone. Our next destination was the Greek island of Mykonos. That was going to be a 2-day trip. So we got to spend the day on board the Spirit. But there's always plenty to do and plenty to eat. We got a ride to the island, then walked across the beachfront to meet our guide and our bus. Mykonos has become a popular tourist destination for good reason. The sun shines for an average of 300 days a year. It rains between February and March. Temperatures can rise as high as 104 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, but the average temperature is around 82. Our first stop was at Kalafidis Beach. Sharon finally got to put her feet in the Aegean Sea. As promised, Sharon grabbed some beach sand for her friend Margot back in Maine. We next stopped in Agno Mera and visited the monastery of Panea Turliani, a 16th century church. When we stopped for lunch, Sharon found another cat friend. We wandered around the little square in Agno Mera, then headed for the Vardaritz restaurant. We had a scrumptious lunch and finished it off with a toast from Ouzo Liquor. That's an anise or a licorice-flavored wine. Meanwhile, Sharon was cutting up whatever little pieces of meat that was left over from her meal or anyone else's to take outside to her new friend. In Greek mythology, the island is said to have been the location of a great battle where Hercules killed the invincible Titans, the giants. It is even said that the large rocks all over the island are the petrified testicles of these giants. This portion of the myth is the source of the slang term stones, attested in most major European languages and American. Though gas prices do vary in Europe somewhat, this is pretty much standard. Having made the entire circuit of the island, our tour bus dropped us back off at Mykonos Beach.
Oh, I was.
We once again availed ourselves of gelato. We reboarded the ship in late afternoon. That airliner is on its way back to Athens. We'll be there in a few days. That night, the ship sailed north through the Greek islands, leaving the Aegean Sea through the Strait of Dardanelles into the Turkish Sea of Marmara, finally docking in Istanbul. What we call Turkey today, previously Anatolia and a lot of other names, has a 3,000 plus year history of living in a violent neighborhood. 2015 was no different. Istanbul is a very modern city of 17 million people. That's approximately equal to New York and LA and Chicago altogether. 2/3 of the city is in the west. That's the west side of the Bosphorus. And the people and culture is more European there. The birth rate is 1 to 2 kids per family. In the east, it's a more historic Arab society and religious culture, with a birth rate of 4 to 5 times that of the west. We boarded a sightseeing boat in Istanbul and headed north up the Bosphorus toward the Black Sea, with Europe on the left bank and Asia on the right. We rode a few miles and then turned around and headed south again. The view was spectacular and the real estate is some of the most expensive in the world. The Emir of Qatar bought one of these riverfront homes a couple of years ago for 100 million euros. That's about $115 million. I don't usually show this much video of one particular place, but I thought I just had to share a few minutes of this fantastic ride with you. And this is Sharon having her first Turkish coffee in Turkey. And here she is posing for Jim's camera. Greek legend of the Trojan War actually did take place in the city of Troy, a western Anatolian city in 1200 BC, today called Turkey. This is Rumelian Castle. It was built by the Ottomans in 1452 when the Turks laid siege to the city, then called Constantinople, to control ships from the Black Sea from aiding the city. In the mountain ranges east of here, on the Armenian border, lies Mount Ararat. That was the legendary resting place of Noah's Ark from the Bible. Many of the people and places referred to in both the Old and New Testament are actually in what is Turkey today. Though Turkey is not part of the EU, gas prices are about the same there now, about $6.50 a gallon. In 2008, it was up to $11. It was the highest in the world. The Sultan Ahmed Mosque, better known as the Blue Mosque, has long been a symbol of the city of Istanbul. It was built in the early 17th century during the rule of Ahmed I. The interior of the mosque is lined with more than 20,000 handmade ceramic tiles. More than 200 stained glass windows emit natural light. The place is positively cavernous. The Grand Bazaar was another surprise. Like probably lots of Westerners, especially Americans, when I heard of Turkey in general and Grand Bazaar specifically, I expected something from Indiana Jones. A dusty backward marketplace, people by dusty shepherds in dusty clothes, bartering for dates and rugs among the numerous camels, goats, sheep, and chickens. Instead, it was more like a high-end mall with plenty of tourist stuff. That, to me, was unexpected. On the return to our ship, our guide told us not to leave anything on the bus, There's no time to turn around and head back to the port to get us our stuff. If you forget it, just check eBay and you can probably buy it back if you're not outbid. She had a great sense of humor. On this night's journey, we left Istanbul through the Dardanelles and south to the port of Kusadasi. Compared with Istanbul's 17 million people, Kusadasi's 65,000 was a striking contrast. It's about the same size as Portland, Maine, but the population grows to about 500,000 in the summer because it's a very popular vacation and tourist area. At breakfast aboard the ship, Sharon cut up some meat and took it with us for the day in case we met any stray felines. Much of this part of Turkey is very fertile land. There are date vineyards and lots of fruit farms all throughout. Until 1994, Turkey was one of the largest tobacco producers in the world. But the government decided that they should be healthier, and the government didn't want to pay the higher health costs that they were getting, so they converted most of their fields to fruits. At the small rest area opposite the ancient ruins of Ephesus, Sharon found some more little kitties. As we were on the road again, there were more endless miles of farms and vineyards. Surprisingly, at least to me, there were more succulent fruits here than I imagined. Lots of pears and peaches. Turkey is the number 5 producer of pears in the entire world. Cats seem to hold an exalted position in Turkey as much as in the U.S. A member on our excursion tripped someplace in the city, hurt himself bad enough to have to call an ambulance. Response was reasonably quick, and I believe the gentleman had a physical disability to start with. And yet another feline friend in Turkey. The Ephesus Temple of Artemis, called Diana by Romans, is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was built in the area of Ephesus on a flat area which has over the centuries turned into a swamp. You'll see a close-up more of that swamp later on. We next visited this rug weaving company. Turkey is number 1 in the world for hand-woven rugs. And don't be fooled, this is a very lucrative business. A basic 8 by 10 foot hand-woven wool rug is about $8,200. Silk ones can go for 10 times that. Bigger ones, even more. This place was relaxed, almost family-oriented. Before we even began the tour, they offered everyone refreshments, including gözleme. It's a traditional Turkish cuisine savory pastry. It's made of hand-rolled dough leaves. It's a lot like a crepe, but even actually lighter. These were filled with either potatoes or cheese. These ladies made it look so simple, but the wraps were so light they were almost delicate and very delicious. They invited guests to even try it for themselves. One more. Our last stop was at the backside of the Temple of Artemis, in the boggy area we talked about earlier. Sharon played a flute when she was younger, and she has a collection of a few right now. She was dickering with a vendor who made his own. We walked away with 2 of them for under $20. These last few shots were taken along the coast road on our ride back to Kusadasi. Crossing our earlier route from Mykonos to Istanbul, we sailed 300 miles east across the Aegean Sea to Piraeus Harbor and Athens, the capital of Greece. The population of the Athens-Piraeus metro area is 5 million people. There's only 11 million in all of Greece. Nearly half of them live in Athens. With its 6,000-year history, Greece is really the cradle of Western civilization. Much of the thought, theater, the arts, philosophy, science, and architecture is our legacy from the ancient Greeks. They were the originators of democracy. In fact, the very word democracy itself is said to be taken from a Greek philosopher named Democritus, meaning, quote, chosen of the people. He is primarily remembered today for his formulation of an atomic theory of the universe in 400 BC. Much more is still with us today, usually unrealized. The Greek myth from earlier in this video of Hercules on Mykonos and the reference to testicles as stones today is another 2 millennia example. The U.S. Apollo space program to take astronauts to the moon was named after Apollo, based on his mythological ability as an archer to hit his target and on his being the god of light and knowledge. The list is endless. The Pan-Athenian Olympic Stadium hosted the first modern Olympic Games in 1896. This is Leo von Klenze, the artist's 1896 conception of what the Acropolis looked like in 500 BC. And this is it today, 2,500 years later. This 5th century BC theater of Dionysus could seat 17,000 spectators. The Dionysia was a large festival in ancient Athens in honor of the god Dionysus. This Odeon was built by the wealthy investor and teacher-politician Herodes Atticus in memory of his wife. It was a venue for musical concerts with a capacity of 5,000. The Acropolis is an ancient citadel built in the 5th century BC and located on a high, rocky outcrop above the city of Athens and contains remains of several ancient buildings, the most famous of which is the Parthenon. From the Acropolis, you can look down on ancient Agora, Tower of the Winds, Herodes Atticus Theater, and the Theater of Dionysus. Throughout the afternoon, the skies got progressively darker and more ominous, but the rain held off until we were in the bus on our way back. The Parthenon was actually a temple dedicated to the goddess Athena. Its main function was to shelter the monumental statue of Athena that was made out of gold and ivory. Nike means victory in Greek, and Athena was worshipped in this form as goddess of victory in war and in wisdom. In the city, on our way back to the ship, we made a quick pit stop. I got a good laugh out of this sign for the restrooms. The trip from Athens to our debarkation port in Venice, Italy, was 680 nautical miles and took 2 days. Venice is built on 100-plus islands in a marshy lagoon in the Adriatic Sea. No cars or roadways, just canals and boats. There are 150 canals and 409 bridges. Current population for Venice, just over 270,000. As we traversed the Grand Canal, the view from the 14th deck, nearly 150 feet above the water, was amazing. As we approached the docking area for cruise ships, at the end of the Grand Canal, we ceased all headway. We were stopped at a right angle to the slip that we were assigned to. At that point, one of our tugs secured a line to our stern and proceeded to swing our 900-foot, 75,000-ton ship around 90 degrees to allow us to dock. We took a Vaporetto, that's a water bus, to the Zaccaria stop. Thereafter, I just followed my friends with the maps. I spend most of my time shooting video and taking pictures. The streets of Venice are pretty much a maze, but as the saying goes, it's actually almost fun getting lost sometimes. You never know what you're going to find when you do. Our hotel, the Locanda Silva, was on the Canal Locanda. This is the view from our 4th floor window. You could hear the bells and see the bell tower at St. Mark's and look right down into the alley and the canal. Everywhere we went, everything was so picturesque, or at least photogenic, that it seemed you just couldn't take it all in.
Oh, that's kind of cute. At least the pattern is.
There are wine stations throughout the city of Venice. If you bring in a liter-plus bottle, they will fill it for just over €2 a liter. It's funny walking the streets, stopping in the theater or whatever, with an open container. Even Sharon said her drinking feds wouldn't be proud of her. We had dinner in one of the innumerable restaurants along one of the innumerable canals. We spent one evening at a show at the Teatro San Gallo. It was a surprisingly enjoyable night with a neat mix of comedy, style, and education on the history of Venice. This is San Marco, that's St. Mark's, in the late afternoon. San Marco is the most famous and tourist-filled district of Venice. You might remember it from the opening scenes of The Italian Job with Donald Sutherland and Mark Wahlberg. Here is also the Basilica di San Marco, Palazzo Ducale, which is the Doge's Palace, and the Campanile on the piazza. where there are battling orchestras of the Café Florian and Café Caudry. You'll hear that later in this video. We began our gondola ride at 7:30 p.m. Yeah, I know. It seems like a tourist thing to do. But how can you go to Venice and not have a gondola ride? It really was quite fun, and I felt like we were in a movie most of the time.
Too freaking cool. Smile, sweetheart. Smile.
And a liter and a half of wine certainly didn't hurt.
Have some more coming out. That's really cool.
And once again, dinner and all its ambiance. The next day were the last two big tours we were signed up for. At St. Mark's Square was the Doge's Palace and St. Mark's Basilica. We were up early the next morning and hired a water taxi to take us to the airport. Marco Polo Airport seemed modern and reasonably efficient. While we waited for our flight to Philadelphia, we were thinking about Sharon's client and later friend, Christina Maragliano, who lives in Italy. This is a quote from her email response. "I was born in Genoa, close to the sea, but live in a village in the mountains, Saint Denis, near the city of Aosta in the Italian Alps, close to the Mont Blanc and the Matterhorn." Sometimes it's not easy to live here in the mountains, but the beauty that surrounds me makes me overcome any difficulties. If you can stay a few more days in Italy, we'll be happy to accommodate you in our little house in the mountains. Sadly, we never had time to visit Christina. However, I'd like to share some pictures of the area where she lives. As we flew over the Italian Alps, we looked out the window and waved a fond goodbye to Christina.